Welcome to, I guess it's the 12th week of school. It seems like it's nearing the end, and I guess that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. It's good that we're wrapping up, and it's bad that we don't have time to do more. I want to talk a little bit about economies of size and economies of scale, and those two concepts constantly get maneuvered in the economic literature, and a lot of times people confuse size and scale. And typically we talk about size in an industry is an important concept, and we talk about the size and concentration of firms, or the structure of an industry being the number and size of those firms. And so an industry that's very concentrated would have a few very large firms. And when we talk about size, we use several different parts of a firm, or descriptions of firms, to get at that size. We can talk about the revenue of the firms. We can talk about the number of employees, the amount of assets, or in some cases the value added as ways to measure the size of the firm. And you can see that those are very different amounts, that even though a firm has a lot of assets, and some firms like General Motors, I think, has $250 billion of assets, but may only generate, in fact, they generated a negative income in the second quarter. So they didn't have a lot of value added. So they would be way down the list if you categorized firms in terms of the value that they added, or the amount of profit that was generated. So if you looked at the number of employees, they'd be fairly large, and some of the largest firms in the United States will have somewhere between 7,000 and 50,000 employees. Okay, so typically when we talk about size, those are the things we're talking about: is revenue, number of employees, amount of assets, and value added. And there's four factors that impose size limits on firms. And there's an article that I've given you to look at that goes in great detail on all these, but I just kind of want to touch on them. And the first one is, they call it atmospheric consequences due to specialization. And so if a firm tries to grow, and one of the problems is there's a concept called exit efficiency, that as a firm grows, it needs more people in management, and the more people you get in that management, the harder it is to get the message from the top management to the employee that's actually doing the production. And so you have a lot of inefficiency in the system. You have a lot of problems of getting that across. And so that's when we talk about size, usually that's the thing we're talking about, is that inefficiency that comes with size due to management. And what happens with this concept called atmospheric consequences, as you have increased specialization in a firm, as that firm gets larger, each employee has a specific job, and as they do that, a lot of times they don't see how they are connected to the entire plant or to the entire firm, and so they become more isolated and less caring about the overall consequences of their actions to the firm. They're only focused on themselves. A second one is a bureaucratic insularity, kind of what I was talking about this exit efficiency, is that as we get more and more layers, those senior members of management become increasingly insulated, separated from the worker, and so you have a problem in that communication. And those senior managers sometimes, again, have that problem of the atmospheric consequences, where the atmosphere of the firm no longer is a concern to them. They're worried about meeting their own specific goals and their own specific needs. So the third one is incentive limits. Most of the time in these larger firms, as the firm gets larger, it's because of that bureaucratic insularity. The managers then become more worried about how employees are going to react to their decisions about merit, about how they've been evaluated. And so typically as that firm gets larger, pay gets to be more a function of how long you've been there, or what job you're holding. And as that happens, you have less incentive for the people that really want to work hard, because it's just a matter of how long I've been there, of how much I'm going to get paid. And so that's that's some inefficiency that's built in the system. And then finally, number 4 is employment relation and communication, the distortion between those bounded constraints, that there is certain cognitive limits on a manager. And you know, you'll find this in your own life, as you get busier, eventually you have to punt something off to somebody else. And that's what happens in any business. As it grows, that manager may have been doing 10 things, now he's doing 5, next thing he's doing 2, and again that leads to that bureaucratic insularity, is he's just moving himself away from the total understanding of that firm. So those are the things that impose size constraints on firms that lead to inefficiency in that firm as it gets bigger. Now the next thing I want to talk about is two offsetting factors to that size. As that firm gets bigger, you have those inefficiencies growing, but it depends on organizational form. And one way to do that is to break that large firm into component firms. Okay, and sometimes we then want to talk about scale economies for each one of those firms, and I'll get to scale economy in a minute. But that organizational form is important. And then the other one is the degree of integration. As firms get larger, and we have that X inefficiency, there's 3 factors that affect that degree to which they integrate, that they vertically integrate, that they become, that they buy up their input supplier, that they buy up the distributor, that they buy up the retail outlets, and they become one big firm from input to output. And those factors that force that to happen are uncertainty. The more uncertainty there is in the market, the more likely that those firms are to integrate, to protect themselves from that uncertainty. So if you think just about the biofuels market, because of the volatility in feed prices and in grain prices over the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of those firms will be thinking about producing their own grain. And this is what's happened to some of the feedlots and to some of the other operations that require those grain stocks, as they've thought about, how do I go and produce that grain myself so I have a constant supply and I set my own price. Frequency of transactions, the more frequent the transactions, again, the more you're going to want to cut those transaction costs by integrating and having that. So if you're buying something on a daily basis, right, and you have all those transactions, there's a cost to that transaction of just having the people to do it. And so one way to cut that off is to incorporate that into your firm. And then finally, asset specificity, and that is as you move into something that has an asset that is only useful for one thing, like a combine. All right, it can't be used for anything else. Then you have a much more likelihood of integrating that part into your business. So those are the things, the factors that go into size. Then I touched briefly on scale, and so again, size had to do with that, the number of employees, the amount of revenue, those kind of things. But when we talk about scale, what we're really talking about is the physical factors of a plant. And what's an optimum size for that plant, given those production factors? How do I maximize profit in that plant? And usually what we're talking about is, for instance, on a biofuels basis, if there's only so much feedstock in a certain area, and we know that it becomes more expensive the further away you get because of transportation, then as that firm tries to lower its cost per unit of output, what it has to do is figure out how big that plant should be in order to get the maximum amount of inputs at a price that's doable to make profit. So that if that plant is too big and they have to go 100 miles to get it, then those last units that they have to get from 100 miles out are going to raise the marginal cost, or the next unit of cost of producing that added. So the size of that plant would shrink until they got to a certain distance where that was an economic amount of grain to run that. Also, the output that they're getting has to have enough, you have to generate enough sales to pay for those fixed assets. So again, there's all those things that go into the scale, and usually when we talk about scale, that's what we're talking about is the production end of it and the inputs that go in to maximizing profit or to getting that optimum output. So there is a difference between economies of size. Economies of size is usually talking about management and how that firm functions, and scale is more the physical attributes of that plant. Okay, so that's all I have on size and scale. I hope you'll do that reading, and we'll see you next week.